What's up, guys? Michael here with Primal Edge. Thanks for tuning in again this week, or if it's your first time here, thanks for clicking. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you're into this type of content, consider subscribing. I'm uploading videos every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Well, today's the day. We're finally going to get this knife fixed. I checked out the poll results, read through the comments you guys left, and thought long and hard about what would look best on this knife. At the end, I decided to go with Honduras rosewood with black liners. Something about that deep reddish hue up against that black liner just looked sweet. And to add a bit of extra flair to it, I decided to use copper pins. Now, since this was a knife repair, I approached it a little bit different than I normally do. The profile was completely done, and I really had to account for that in this build. A lot of times when I'm making a knife, I keep a little extra meat on the handle, knowing that it's going to end up on the grinder, and I'll probably hit a little bit of that metal when shaping the handle. I didn't have that luxury this time, so I decided to do it one side at a time. I started off in an assembly line fashion by first prepping the scales. I started off by fixing the liners to the scales and make sure everything was looking good. Once the epoxy hardened, I chipped off the excess, sanded it smooth, and made it perfect. Now, I wasn't really trying to flatten it down, more like tease up the fibers of the liners, just to get it ready for the next step. Once that was finished, a liberal coat of isopropyl rubbing alcohol to get the surface clean, remove the dust, and get rid of any grease from my fingertips. The bolsters on this knife presented a bit of a challenge. They weren't flat. They had an angle, which I thought was a really cool detail when I saw it on the knife. So I went to the KMG, installed the platen, and crept up on it until I got a perfect fit. Then it was just a matter of mixing up a batch of epoxy and installing the scale. Now in this instance, I did do one side at a time, and you'll see why in a minute. Gotta make sure to keep that work surface clean. In the end, I decided to go with two pins, one in the back, one in the front. The customer made mention that he wasn't interested in having the lanyard hold back in, so I excluded that from the build. Once the holes were drilled, it was back over to the KMG to remove the excess material on the first side of the scales. I made sure to get myself as close as humanly possible during this stage. I really wanted to be able to see what I was doing when I put the other side of the handle on. Installing that second handle was not much more different than installing the first. Lined it up, added the epoxy, tapped it in place to make sure it had a snug fit, and then set her aside to dry. Finished drilling out the pinholes while it was still flat. Used the scroll saw to trim out most of the meat. Back over to the KMG for round 2. This time, we're looking for finishing. I started out by getting as close as I could to the tang and finishing that stage as much as I possibly could. I knew there was going to be a whole lot of hand sanding involved here, but I wanted to minimize that as much as possible. I did use a pretty aggressive grit here, but in the end it was the best choice. I didn't want to use anything too fine because I knew I had so much material to take care of, and I was going to go back with the finer grits later anyway. I held off installing the copper pins until a little later in the process. There was so much meat I had to take off the sides that I didn't want to worry about excess heat being generated with all that friction. Yeah, I saved you the trouble of fast forwarding. There was a whole lot of sanding involved at this point. I kept the size of the holes slightly smaller than the pins that I was going to be installing. I installed them into the end of my drill gun and let the spin of the drill bit drive it all the way in. I got a really snug, really tight, perfect fit. For a finish, I kept it traditional, boiled linseed oil. Now, one step I did exclude during the finish process was using a bench grinder with a polish wheel on it. I put a couple of coats of linseed oil and a couple of coats of beeswax directly onto the wood, took it over to the bench grinder and polished it up nice. It gave it a real slick, real clean finish. All in all, I'm happy with the way this turned out, and I think the client's going to be pleased. I'll be sending it out to him a little later this week. In fact, if you're watching this video, it's probably already in the post heading out to his house now. Thanks for watching today, guys, and I hope you made it to the end. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and let me know. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are about the materials used and how it came out. Thanks again for tuning in. You all have a great day, and I'll see you next Thursday.